Welcome back to Hereby Ordered, where we examine the occasional executive order issued from what's left of the White House, which was initially just a cynical turn of phrase, but turns out to be an oddly appropriate observation given today's document, because we're about to read through Executive Order 14318, which was signed along with two other orders on Wednesday, July 23rd of 2025, and published in the Federal Register on Monday, July 28th, and it was titled Accelerating Federal Permitting of Data Center Infrastructure. Now, I mentioned the publication date here as well because that was just 3 days before the White House released a statement announcing that the White House State Ballroom would begin construction in September of 2025, cost, quote, approximately $200 million, cover, quote, approximately 90,000 total square feet, and be situated, quote, where the small, heavily changed and reconstructed East Wing currently sits. In a live statement made the same day, Trump claimed that the ballroom, quote, won't interfere with the current building. It'll be near it, but not touching it, and pays total respect to the existing building, which of course turned out to be entirely untrue, as most things that he says tend to be. It may not seem immediately apparent why I'm mentioning those details here, but I absolutely intend to dovetail back around to them after reading through Executive Order 14318. So this is where I'll reiterate my customary suggestion that presidents should be required to cite the specific laws or constitutional provisions that they're invoking for a particular executive order, as this one begins, by the authority vested in me as president by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, it is hereby ordered. Section 1, Policy and Purpose. My administration has inaugurated a golden age for American manufacturing and technological dominance. We will pursue bold, large scale industrial plans to vault the United States further into the lead on critical manufacturing processes and technologies that are essential to national security, economic prosperity, and scientific leadership. These plans include artificial intelligence, AI, data centers, and infrastructure that powers them, including high voltage transmission lines and other equipment. It will be a priority of my administration to facilitate the rapid and efficient build out of this infrastructure by easing federal regulatory burdens. In addition, my administration will utilize federally owned land and resources for the expeditious and orderly development of data centers. This usage will be done in a manner consistent with the land's intended purpose, to be used in service of the prosperity and security of the American people. Section 2, Definitions. For purposes of this order, subsection A, data center project means a facility that requires greater than 100 megawatts MW of new load dedicated to AI inference, training, simulation, or synthetic data generation. Subsection B, covered components means materials, products, and infrastructure that are required to build data center projects or otherwise upon which data center projects depend, including paragraph 1, energy infrastructure such as transmission lines, natural gas pipelines or laterals, substations, switchyards, transformers, switchgear, and system protective facilities. Paragraph 2, natural gas turbines, coal power equipment, nuclear power equipment, geothermal power equipment, and any other dispatchable baseload energy sources, including electrical infrastructure, including backup power supply, constructed or otherwise used principally to serve a data center project. Paragraph 3, semiconductors and semiconductor materials such as wafers, dies, and packaged integrated circuits. Paragraph 4, networking equipment such as switches and routers. And paragraph 5, data storage such as hardware storage systems, software for data management and protection, and integrated services that work with public cloud providers. Subsection C, covered component project means infrastructure comprising with public cloud providers. Subsection C, covered component project means infrastructure comprising covered components or a facility with the primary purposes of manufacturing or otherwise producing covered components. Subsection D, qualifying project means, paragraph 1, a data center project or covered component project for which the project sponsor has committed at least $500 million in capital expenditures as determined by the Secretary of Commerce. Paragraph 2, a data center project or covered component project involving an incremental electric load addition of greater than 100 MW. Paragraph 3, a data center project or covered component project that protects national security, or paragraph 4, a data center project or covered component project that has otherwise been designated by the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of the Interior, the Secretary of Commerce, or the Secretary of Energy as a qualifying project. Subsection E, Project sponsor means the lead sponsor providing financial and other support for a data center project or covered component project as determined by the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of the Interior, the Secretary of Commerce, or the Secretary of Energy as appropriate. Subsection F. Superfund site means any site where action is being taken pursuant to 42 U.S.C. 9604, 9606, or 9620. Subsection G. Brownfield site means a site as defined in 42 U.S.C. 9601, Section 39, which, as a not so brief aside, reads Paragraph A. In general, the term brownfield site means real property, the expansion, redevelopment, or reuse of which may be complicated by the presence or potential presence of a hazardous substance, pollutant, or contaminant. Paragraph B. Exclusions. The term brownfield site does not include, subparagraph 1, a facility that is the subject of a planned or ongoing removal action under this subchapter. Subparagraph 2, a facility that is listed on the National Priorities List or is proposed for listing. Subparagraph 3, a facility that is the subject of a unilateral administrative order, a court order, an administrative order on consent, or a judicial consent decree that has been issued to or entered into by the parties under this chapter. Subparagraph 4, a facility that is the subject of a unilateral administrative order, a court order, an administrative order on consent, or judicial consent decree that has been issued to or entered into by the parties, or a facility to which a permit has been issued by the United States or an authorized state under the Solid Waste Disposal Act, 42 U.S.C. 6901 et sequens, the Federal Water Pollution Control Act, 33 U.S.C. 1321, 33 U.S.C. Section 1251 et sequens, the Toxic Substances Control Act, 15 U.S.C. 2601 et sequens, or the Safe Drinking Water Act, 42 U.S.C. 300F et sequens. Subparagraph 5. A facility that, Clause 1, is subject to corrective action under Section 3004 subsection U or 3008 subsection H of the Solid Waste Disposal Act, 42 U.S.C. 6924 subsection U, 6928 subsection H, and Clause 2, to which a corrective action permit or order has been issued or modified to require the implementation of corrective measures. Subparagraph 6. A land disposal unit with respect to which, Clause 1, a closure notification under Subtitle C of the Solid Waste Disposal Act, 42 U.S.C. 6921 et sequens, has been submitted, and, Clause 2, closure requirements have been specified in a closure plan or permit. Subparagraph 7. A facility that is subject to the jurisdiction, custody, or control of a department, agency, or instrumentality of the United States, except for land held in trust by the United States for an Indian tribe. Subparagraph 8. A portion of a facility, Clause 1, at which there has been a release of polychlorinated biphenyls, and, Clause 2, that is subject to remediation under the Toxic Substances Control Act, 15 U.S.C. 2601 et sequens, or, Subparagraph 9, a portion of a facility for which portion assistance for response activity has been obtained under Subtitle 1 of the Solid Waste Disposal Act, 42 U.S.C. 6991 et sequens, from the Leaking Underground Storage Tank Trust Fund established under Section 9508 of Title 26. Paragraph C. Site-by-site determinations. Notwithstanding subparagraph B, and on a site-by-site basis, the President may authorize financial assistance under Section 9604, subsection K of this title to an eligible entity at a site included in Clause 1, 4, 5, 6, 8, or 9 of subparagraph B if the President finds that financial assistance may protect human health and the environment and either promote economic development or enable the creation of, preservation of, or addition to parks, greenways, undeveloped property, other recreational property, or other property used for nonprofit purposes. Paragraph D. Additional areas. For the purposes of Section 9604, subsection K of this title, the term brownfield site includes a site that, subparagraph 1, meets the definition of brownfield site under subparagraphs A through C, and, subparagraph 2, clause 1, is contaminated by a controlled substance as defined in Section 802 of Title 21. Clause 2, subclause AA, is contaminated by petroleum or a petroleum product excluded from the definition of hazardous substance under this section, and, subclause BB, is a site for which there is no viable responsible party and that is determined by the administrator or the state as appropriate to be a site that will be assessed, investigated, or cleaned up by a person that is not potentially liable for cleaning up the site under this chapter or any other law pertaining to the cleanup of petroleum products, and subclause CC is not subject to any order issued under section 9003 subsection H of the Solid Waste Disposal Act 42 U.S.C. 6991b paragraph H, or clause 3 is mine-scarred land. Section 3. Encouraging qualifying projects. The Secretary of Commerce, in consultation with the Director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, OSTP, and other relevant executive departments and agencies, shall launch an initiative to provide financial support for qualifying projects, which could include loans and loan guarantees, grants, tax incentives, and offtake agreements. All relevant agencies shall identify and submit to the Director of OSTP any such relevant existing financial support that can be used to assist qualifying projects consistent with the protection of national security. Section 4. Revocation of Executive Order 14141. Executive Order 14141 of January 14, 2025, advancing United States leadership in artificial intelligence infrastructure, is hereby revoked. Which, as a brief aside, was an 11,800-word order issued by President Joe Biden 6 days before he left office. And I have no intention of reading that in its entirety, but the recap is that it established a comprehensive federal strategy to expand and secure artificial intelligence infrastructure in the United States, emphasizing national security, economic competitiveness, environmental sustainability, and community involvement. A core directive was that by early 2025, the Departments of Defense, Energy, and the Interior were to identify federal land suitable for leasing to private entities to build frontier AI data centers and associated clean energy infrastructure. Criteria for site selection included minimized environmental and community impacts, proximity to transmission and communications networks, and workforce access. Competitive proposals from industry, especially consortia that included small and medium-sized organizations, were to be solicited and evaluated, with winning applications being required to meet high labor, safety, security, and environmental standards, procure clean energy resources sufficient to power the data centers, and advance AI innovations while ensuring broad access for startups and smaller firms. Strong cybersecurity and supply chain protections and collaboration with federal national security efforts were required. Additionally, federal agencies were instructed to expedite permitting for AI infrastructure projects and coordinate transmission upgrades to support reliable power delivery, with reports on impact to electricity costs, best practices for clean energy integration, and avenues for community engagement being required. International engagement to promote global AI infrastructure development was also emphasized, and the order integrated clean energy goals and community safeguards into the nation's AI infrastructure expansion. Section 5. Efficient environmental reviews. Subsection A. Within 10 days of the date of this order, each relevant agency shall identify to the Council on Environmental Quality any categorical exclusions already established or adopted by such agency pursuant to the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, reliance on and adoption of which by agencies pursuant to 42 U.S.C. 4336 and 4336C could facilitate the construction of qualifying projects. Subsection B. The Council on Environmental Quality shall coordinate with relevant agencies on the establishment of new categorical exclusions to cover actions related to qualifying projects that normally do not have a significant effect on the human environment. Agencies shall, for purposes of establishing these categorical exclusions, rely on any sufficient basis to do so as each such agency determines. Subsection C. Consistent with 42 U.S.C. 4336, subsection E, paragraph 10, subparagraph B, clause 3, loans, loan guarantees, grants, tax incentives, or other forms of federal financial assistance for which an agency lacks substantial project-specific control and responsibility over the subsequent use of such financial assistance shall not be considered a, quote, major federal action under NEPA. For purposes of this order, federal financial assistance representing less than 50% of total project costs shall be presumed not to constitute substantial federal control and responsibility. Section 6. Efficiency and transparency through FAST 41. Subsection A. The executive director of the Federal Permitting Improvement Steering Council, FPISC, may, within 30 days of the date that a project is identified to FPISC by a relevant agency, designate a qualifying project as a transparency project pursuant to 42 U.S.C. 4370 M-2, subsection B, paragraph 2, subparagraph A, item 3, which, as a brief aside, reads, projects other than covered projects. Subitem 1. In general, the executive director may direct a lead agency to create a specific entry on the dashboard for a project that is not a covered project and is under review by the lead agency if the executive director determines that a dashboard entry for that project is in the interest of transparency. Subitem 2. Requirements. Not later than 14 days after the date on which the executive director directs the lead agency to create a specific entry on the dashboard for a project described in subclause 1, the lead agency shall create and maintain a specific entry on the dashboard for the project that contains Clause AA, a comprehensive permitting timetable as described in subsection C, paragraph 2, subparagraph A. Clause BB. The status of the compliance of each lead agency, cooperating agency, and participating agency with the permitting timetable required under item AA. Clause CC. Any modifications of the permitting timetable required under item AA, including an explanation as to why the permitting timetable was modified, and Clause DD, information about project-related public meetings, public hearings, and public comment periods, which shall be presented in English and the predominant language of the community or communities most affected by the project as that information becomes available. And Section 41003 of the Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act, Public Law 114-94, 129 Statute 1312-1747, FAST 41. Within 30 days of receiving such agency notification, the executive director may publish qualifying projects on the permitting dashboard established under Section 41003, subsection B of FAST 41, including schedules for expedited review. Subsection B. In consultation with project sponsors, the executive director shall expedite the transition of eligible qualifying projects from transparency projects to FAST 41, covered projects as defined by 42 U.S.C. 4370 subsection M, paragraph 6, subparagraph A, which, as a brief aside, reads, in general, the term, covered project means any activity in the United States that requires authorization or environmental review by a federal agency involving construction of infrastructure for renewable or conventional energy production, electricity transmission, surface transportation, aviation, ports and waterways, water resource projects, broadband, pipelines, manufacturing, semiconductors, artificial intelligence and machine learning, high-performance computing and advanced computer hardware and software, quantum information science and technology, data storage and data management, cybersecurity, carbon capture, energy storage, or any other sector as determined by a majority vote of the Council that, Clause 1, Subclause 1, is subject to any PA, Subclause 2, is likely to require a total investment of more than $200 million, and, Subclause 3, does not qualify for abbreviated authorization or environmental review processes under any applicable law. Clause 2 is covered by a programmatic plan or environmental review developed for the primary purpose of facilitating development of carbon dioxide pipelines. Clause 3 is, Subclause 1, subject to any PA. Subclause 2, sponsored by an Indian tribe as defined in Section 5304 of Title 25, an Alaska Native Corporation, a Native Hawaiian organization as defined in Section 7517 of Title 20, the Department of Hawaiian Homelands or the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, and, Subclause 3, located on land owned or under the jurisdiction of the entity that sponsors the activity under Subclause 2, or, Clause 4, is subject to any PA and the size and complexity of which, in the opinion of the Council, make the project likely to benefit from enhanced oversight and coordination, including a project likely to require, Subclause 1, authorization from or environmental review involving more than 2 federal agencies, or, Subclause 2, the preparation of an environmental impact statement under any PA. To the extent that a qualifying project does not meet the criteria set forth in 42 U.S.C. 4370 subsection M paragraph 6 subparagraph A clause 1 or 3, FPISC may consider all other available options to designate the project a covered project under 42 U.S.C. 4370 subsection M paragraph 6 subparagraph A clause 4. Section 7. Streamlining of permitting review. Subsection A. The administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency shall assist in expediting permitting on federal and non-federal lands by developing or modifying regulations promulgated under the Clean Air Act, 42 U.S.C. 7401 et sequens, the Clean Water Act, 33 U.S.C. 1251 et sequens, the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, 42 U.S.C. 9601 et sequens, the Toxic Substances Control Act, 15 U.S.C. 2601 et sequens, and other relevant applicable laws, in each case that impact the development of qualifying projects. Subsection B. The administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency shall, consistent with the Environmental Protection Agency's statutory authorities, expeditiously identify brownfield sites and Superfund sites for use by qualifying projects. As part of this effort, within 180 days of the date of this order, the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency shall develop guidance to help expedite environmental reviews for qualifying reuse and assist state governments and private parties to return such brownfield sites and Superfund sites to productive use as expeditiously as possible. Section 8. Biological and water permitting efficiencies. Subsection A. Upon identification of sites by the Secretary of the Interior and the Secretary of Energy as described in Section 9 of this order, the action agency, as identified through the process described in the Endangered Species Act, 16 U.S.C. 1531 through 1544, ESA, shall initiate consultation under Section 7 of the ESA with the Secretary of the Interior, the Secretary of Commerce, or both with respect to common construction activities for qualifying projects that will occur over the next 10 years at a programmatic level. The Secretary of the Interior and the Secretary of Commerce shall utilize programmatic consultation to ensure timely and efficient completion of such consultation. Subsection B. Within 180 days of the date of this order, the Secretary of the Army, acting through the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works, shall review the nationwide permits issued under Section 404 of the Clean Water Act of 1972, 33 U.S.C. 1344, and Section 10 of the Rivers and Harbors Appropriation Act of 1899, 33 U.S.C. 403, to determine whether an activity-specific nationwide permit is needed to facilitate the efficient permitting of activities related to qualifying projects. Section 9. Federal lands availability. Subsection A. The Department of the Interior and the Department of Energy shall, after consultation with industry and further in consultation with the Department of Commerce as to the project sponsors to which relevant authorizations shall be granted, offer appropriate authorizations for sites identified by the Secretary of the Interior or the Secretary of Energy as applicable and appropriate for the relevant uses consistent with 42 U.S.C. 2201, 42 U.S.C. 7256, 43 U.S.C. 1701 et sequens, and all other applicable law. Subsection B. The Secretary of Defense shall, pursuant to 10 U.S.C. 2667 or other applicable law, and as and when the Secretary of Defense deems it necessary and desirable, identify suitable sites on military installations for covered component infrastructure uses and competitively lease available lands for qualifying projects to support the Department of Defense's energy, workforce, and mission needs, subject to security and force protection considerations. Section 10. General Provisions. Subsection A. Nothing in this order shall be construed to impair or otherwise affect, paragraph 1, the authority granted by law to an executive department or agency or the head thereof, or, paragraph 2, the functions of the Director of the Office of Management and Budget relating to budgetary, administrative, or legislative proposals. Subsection B. This order shall be implemented consistent with applicable law and subject to the availability of appropriations. Subsection C. This order is not intended to and does not create any right or benefit, substantive or procedural, enforceable at law or in equity by any party against the United States, its departments, agencies, or entities, its officers, employees, or agents, or any other person. Subsection D. The cost for publication of this order shall be borne by the Department of Energy. July 23, 2025. As mentioned, this order was signed on Wednesday, July 23rd of 2025, and then published in the Federal Register on Monday, July 28th of 2025. 3 days after that, the White House separately released a statement reading, "For 150 years, presidents, administrations, and White House staff have longed for a large event space on the White House complex that can hold substantially more guests than currently allowed. President Donald J. Trump has expressed his commitment to solving this problem on behalf of future administrations and the American people. The White House is one of the most beautiful and historic buildings in the world, yet the White House is currently unable to host major functions honoring world leaders in other countries without having to install a large and unsightly tent approximately 100 yards away from the main building entrance. The White House State Ballroom will be a much needed and exquisite addition of approximately 90,000 total square feet of ornately designed and carefully crafted space with a seated capacity of 650 people, a significant increase from the 200-person seated capacity of the East Room of the White House. In recent weeks, President Trump has held several meetings with members of the White House staff, the National Park Service, the White House Military Office, and the United States Secret Service to discuss design features and planning. President Trump has chosen McCrary Architects as lead architect, which is well known for their classical architectural design and based in our nation's capital. CEO Jim McCrary said, quote, "Presidents in the modern era have faced challenges hosting major events in the White House because it has been untouched since President Harry Truman. I am honored that President Trump has entrusted me to help bring this beautiful and necessary renovation to the People's House while preserving the elegance of its classical design and historical importance. The construction team will be headed by Clark Construction, and the engineering team will be led by AECOM. The project will begin in September 2025, and it is expected to be completed long before the end of President Trump's term. President Trump and other Patriot donors have generously committed to donating the funds necessary to build this approximately $200 million structure. The United States Secret Service will provide the necessary security enhancements and modifications. The White House ballroom will be substantially separated from the main building of the White House, but at the same time, its theme and architectural heritage will be almost identical. The site of the new ballroom will be where the small, heavily changed and reconstructed East Wing currently sits. The East Wing was constructed in 1902 and has been renovated and changed many times, with a second story added in 1942. The White House Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, said the following, quote, "President Trump is a builder at heart and has an extraordinary eye for detail. The President and the Trump White House are fully committed to working with the appropriate organizations to preserving the special history of the White House while building a beautiful ballroom that can be enjoyed by future administrations and generations of Americans to come. The White House will continue to provide the American public with updates on this project at whitehouse.gov/visit. The demolition of the East Wing that Trump claimed wasn't going to happen began on October 20th of 2025 and was completed by the 24th, including the removal of a pair of magnolia trees planted in commemoration of Presidents Warren G. Harding and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, which were 103 years old and 83 years old respectively, and the destruction of the Jacqueline Kennedy Garden, which had been established by First Lady Ellen Wilson in 1914 and eventually renamed after First Lady Jackie Kennedy in April of 1965 by First Lady Claudia Johnson. Trump has since been sued by the National Trust for Historic Preservation, a congressionally chartered nonprofit organization created, quote, to save places where our history happened, which asserted that, quote, no president is legally allowed to tear down portions of the White House without any review whatsoever. Not President Trump, not President Joe Biden, and not anyone else. And no president is legally allowed to construct a ballroom on public property without giving the public the opportunity to weigh in. Now, a few weeks prior to the destruction of the East Wing, Wired magazine reported that the Department of Homeland Security's Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, specifically contracting officers Marlon Clark and Brittany Tobias, issued a request for information for investigative and analytical services in support of U.S. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, Enforcement and Removal Operations, Targeting Operations Division at the National Criminal Analysis and Targeting Center in Williston, Vermont, and the Pacific Enforcement Response Center in Santa Ana, California. The request included a 20-page draft performance work statement, which explained that the agency has formed the Targeting Operations Division in order to, quote, identify and locate aliens that pose a threat to public safety using data gathered from, quote, a wide range of information sources, including publicly available internet-based social media platforms such as Facebook, Google+, LinkedIn, Pinterest, Tumblr, Instagram, VK, Flickr, MySpace, the platform formerly known as Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, WhatsApp, and YouTube, including, quote, the collection of any public messages such as tweets, postings, and other media data such as photos, documents such as resumes, or geocached information, in part using artificial intelligence systems to scrutinize the data. The division expects analysis turnaround times as short as 30 minutes, which may seem at first like an untenable proposition, since processing that magnitude of information would require a facility costing upwards of $400 million and covering somewhere in the neighborhood of 90,000 square feet. The enforcement agency's primary investigative database in the HSI data warehouse in Washington, D.C., was built by Palantir Technologies, which also just happens to be one of the major contributors to the White House State Ballroom construction project, along with a Rolodex of other technology corporations, defense manufacturers, and cryptocurrency companies, including Coinbase, Meta Platforms, Apple, Lockheed Martin, BlackRock Inc., Amazon, T-Mobile, Ripple Labs, Microsoft, the NVIDIA Corporation, Tether Limited, Gemini, Comcast, Paxos, and Alphabet Incorporated, as well as Booz Allen Hamilton Holding Corporation, a company specializing in digital transformation and artificial intelligence. Additionally, on December 4th, the aforementioned McCrary Architects was removed as lead architect on the project and replaced by Shalom Baroness Associates, who are notably responsible for the reinforcement project at the Pentagon in the aftermath of the 9/11 attack in September of 2001. Now, 90,000 square feet is actually not an unreasonable amount of space for a ballroom. The Venetian Ballroom at the Venetian Resort in Las Vegas covers 85,500 square feet, and both the Forum Ballroom and the Summit Ballroom at Caesars Forum Conference Center are about 110,000 square feet, making them the world's largest pillarless event spaces. In the context of President's Park, where the White House is situated, however, 90,000 square feet is a substantial area. The executive residence of the White House sits on a footprint of about 15,000 square feet and consists of a total of 55,000 square feet. That's just a bit smaller than the area of an NFL football field, including end zones, and yet the State Ballroom is supposed to be 1.6 times larger than that. If the ballroom has 4 floors above ground like the executive residence does, then it would have a footprint of 22,500 square feet, or 1.5 times the size of the main building. Now, the executive residence also has 2 basement levels, but the ballroom project can't include any brand new underground construction because it turns out that the East Wing had been built on top of a facility known as the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, a bunker at least 5 stories deep that was designed to withstand the nuclear attack. The cost of the project is also mathematically suspicious. Initially estimated to cost $200 million, the budget has since ballooned to $400 million, which may not seem that excessive until we remember that the building is only 90,000 square feet, which works out to $4,440 per square foot. For comparison, SoFi Stadium is one of the most expensive buildings in the United States, costing $5.5 billion to design and build and consisting of 3.1 million square feet, which works out to $1,774 per square foot, or a little more than half as much as the ballroom. One World Trade Center in New York City costs $3.9 billion to design and build and consists of 3.6 million square feet, which works out to $1,083 per square foot, or about a third the cost of the ballroom. A cost of more than $4,400 per square foot doesn't seem like it could possibly be right, until we realize that buildings with square footage costs that high tend to be technical facilities like nuclear reactors or data centers. The largest mid-size co-location data centers, which is the most common size range globally, is usually between 70,000 and 100,000 square feet. The Equinix IBX DC3 data center in Ashburn, Virginia, for instance, occupies about 95,400 square feet. The DC-15 and DC-21 facilities in particular cost a total of $206 million to build and consist of 64,000 square feet between them, which works out to about $3,200 per square foot, which tells us a whole lot more about what this quote-unquote state ballroom actually is, and why it was announced 3 days after Executive Order 14318 was published in the Federal Register.